Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're getting right back into things after a 2-week break, and not really paying attention to Call of Duty esports as closely as we have in the past. We're back. We're back to talk about the Pro-Am Classic, which happened a little like a week and a half ago. And we also have the first week of the Major 3 qualifiers to talk about as well. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Like you said, had some Call of Duty action we haven't actually talked about. So
Yep.
excited to go over that as best we can, and looking forward for the in my eyes at least, the real second half of the season coming up.
Yeah. You were in the Dominican this weekend, right? Or this
I was
past
in
week?
Florida,
Oh,
for
okay.
this weekend.
All right. It didn't look like you got any sun, though. So,
Nope.
all right. Bink's not, even when he goes to Florida, he still is not going outside. So that's
I was
unfortunate.
outside. I just don't tan.
All right. We got to work on that. Let's talk about the roster changes stuff before we get into the matches. So the most recent roster news comes out of the Los Angeles Guerrillas. They haven't been having like a real good time since they won the second major of the Call of Duty League season. And they've decided to make a roster change. This was a change that we had talked about on past shows about what the Guerrillas might do if Gunless, recovered and he was fully ready to go, and they had Spart in the lineup. Now we have our answer. Gunless is back in the LAG starting lineup, and Spart is back to the bench. Obviously, if you remember, Spart subbed in for Gunless for the last week of the Major 2 qualifiers and then at the second major as well. And LAG ended up winning the second major, an incredible run through the losers bracket, mostly due to an incredible search and destroy run. But they've had a kind of a tough go, at least at the Pro-Am Classic and in the first week of the Major 3 qualifiers. And Gunless, who is now fortunately recovered, he's ready to go. He's back in the starting lineup. What do you think about that, Bink?
Yeah, this makes sense from multiple perspectives in my eyes. Um, Although when we were talking, after the second major, it felt like a very difficult decision and one that could dictate what the other teams do in terms of like roster changes. But not now that Gunless is recovered and stuff, he's just such a high caliber player. I feel like you have to get him back in there, and especially due to some meta changes that are might necessarily be not in LED's control in terms of like the Volk being GA'd. That could affect things there, and I don't want to say like just because the Volk isn't in use, that's why Spart's no longer playing. But obviously, this past week, LAG went 0-2 in their qualifiers, and they had a 06 map count. So they lost their 2 searches, which obviously teams are going to lose searches, but it's noteworthy considering LAG's previous success and their streak in that mode in particular. So yeah, this from a timing perspective, if Gunless is fully healthy and with recent struggles, however you want to categorize them for the team, I think it makes sense that he is being reinserted into the lineup.
I agree with you. I think it makes a lot of sense to put Gunless back there. I think it would be a different story if they were 6-0 in map count and they did well at the Pro-Am Classic. I think that decision would be a lot harder
Yep.
for the Gorillas. But with the way that they've played, and I'm not really factoring the Pro-Am Classic into a lot of like how I view the current shape of the CDL, because that event is it's odd because you have 4 extra teams. It's a single elimination bracket. You're in, a smaller group. So, it's a lot different format than what the entire CDL has been doing to this point in the season. So I'm not really factoring in the Pro-Am Classic results as much as, these qualifying matches, even if the qualifying matches are online, which, we know that it causes some variance, and it's not as predictable because it's online. That being said, I think that this is the right move. I hate when players are replaced on a permanent basis or whatever because of injury in traditional sports, is what I'm talking about. But in esports as well, I don't want to see Gunless lose his spot, even if Spart is doing very well. And I also thought that this was a very real possibility that LAG would kind of come back down to earth after that major, because I don't think it was that sustainable for them to continue to win like 80% of their search and destroys and, win all of those series while doing that in search and destroy, and then not, be good in the other game modes. Like, you can't win like 55% or lower. I think maybe in hardpoint or control or something, they were under a 50% win percentage at the major with Spart. I don't think that's sustainable. Like, that makes it very difficult to win matches when you're just, relying on S&Ds, because you have to force game 5 pretty much every time at that point. And, like I said, that's just not sustainable. So I'm not really surprised to see LAG make this move, because I'm not really surprised that LAG are, I'm not saying bad, but just like they're not the best team in the game, in my opinion. But we also had another roster change. This is seemingly more of a temporary one, but ProLoot, who has been a really good Challengers player, won the North American Challengers Finals last season, and he's won several Challengers events throughout his time since the Challengers began. He is subbing in for Illy, who we didn't talk about it because we didn't do a post show for the Pro-Am, but Illy tried to play at the Pro-Am Classic. Initially, General, who was at the time Optic Texas's only substitute, he was going to sub in for Illy because Illy has a thumb injury, or some kind of infection, I think, is what but it's causing some issues. And obviously in Call of Duty, especially with the controllers and everything, having a thumb issue is like one of the worst things for a Call of Duty player. It would make their lives a lot harder. So initially, General was going to play that entire tournament for Optic. Illy decided to go ahead and play to start the tournament, but I believe after their first match, which they won, he decided to back out because it was causing some pain in his thumb. So General came back in. They actually had a very good run. I believe they got like 3rd, 4th at the Pro-Am Classic. So a very respectable run from them, especially with the circumstances. But after the tournament, Optic announced that Illy was not going to be able to play for a little bit in the qualifying matches, which are much more important than the Pro-Am because they count toward the Cdl points and toward seeding for not only these next 2 majors or this major, but also because of champs, which is the most important thing in all of these teams' minds. So they decided that Illy would be benched for the time being while he recovers, and ProLoot would come in. I'm not sure how much you know about ProLoot. I mean, I don't know him personally or anything, but personally, just like I respect how much he's been able to do in Challengers, because that's it's tough for everybody in Challengers. A lot of online play, not a lot of not a way out for some of those guys, because ProLoot and guys like Mohawk have been grinding for years in Challengers, and they haven't really gotten this opportunity. So what do you think about ProLoot coming in to Optic Texas's roster?
Yeah, I think First off, like you said, I also don't know too much about him personally or individually. I've obviously heard his name, when people are talking about challengers and stuff like that. And I know he's seen success. But I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me was that um, Optic posted a video with like Rainbow and Hex to announce the change here, and it makes sense just from a role standpoint that like general coming in for Illy just wasn't necessarily the best move from a roles perspective because general almost has always been a main AR, and that's obviously what Dashi is doing now and is most comfortable doing. So um, general was kind of being pushed into the flex role. Obviously it was an emergency situation, um, but that's just not what he's done throughout his career. So from a role standpoint, it makes more sense to get Prelude in there, and especially, I mean, again, I couldn't even tell you if he's more traditionally a flex in challengers or anything like that, but I get from a role standpoint, if he is, that makes sense. And even if he's not, we've kind of touched on just due to the maps in Vanguard, there's a lot of maps where you're gonna have 3 ARs, and there's a lot of maps where, or not a lot of maps, but there are some maps in the competitive pool where you're just gonna have to have 3 ARs, and others where you have to have 3 subs. So, if that's something ProLoot is able to more comfortably do, it can only benefit Optic in the short term, while Illy has to rest up. And obviously, we're wishing the best for Illy and hoping to see him back soon, because he's another, similar to the Gunless situation. Illy's an exciting player to watch, and it sucks when some of the top players in the game aren't able to compete. But obviously, this is a big opportunity for ProLoot as well. Obviously, coming into it, he knows, and everybody knows, this isn't a long-term thing. Like, even if he absolutely pops off, he's not like gonna take Illy's starting spot. So this is just his opportunity to showcase himself and what he's capable of doing, and he's doing it on the most popular team with the biggest fan base in Call of Duty. So a lot of eyes are going to be on him, and that's just, as long as he performs well, that means it could open up more opportunities for him down the road. And probably not the rest of this year, but I mean, who knows? I guess it could, and even if it doesn't, it still, has more eyes on him moving forward and potentially into next season.
Yeah, this is an incredible opportunity for him because, like you said, it's the most popular team in the entire scene. And in Call of Duty esports, there is Optic, then there's FaZe, and then there's the rest, really, because those are Optic has been the most popular team for years and years, and for him to get this opportunity, his pro debut, his CDL debut, and he's playing alongside Scump and Dashi, like that's a big opportunity for him. And also just like we saw it with Paul X earlier in the season. Paul X came into London. He was there for 1 week and he was subbing in and he did his job and they got wins. He performed well. And, the very next week he's off to New York, or, 2 weeks or whatever. So he gets that shot with New York and now he's, kind of excelling in that role with the subliners. I think that is a real possibility for ProLoot. Obviously, a team has to take a chance on him and, pay him really and like get him over to their roster. But, at least for the time being, he has an incredible opportunity in front of him and able to grow his fan base, however, many fans are going to follow him. But just a great shot for him. I touched on Twitter. I tweeted about it, about ProLoot coming into the roster. So Rambo said that it's for the foreseeable short-term future due to the thumb injury for Illy. But I also tweeted about how like ProLoot and Mohawk, especially like these guys that have been grinding away in challengers, like they really deserve that opportunity. And a lot of the opportunities that they probably would have gotten have been taken away because of COVID or because of the lack of expansion, which are likely tied together, what we're imagining, right? But like the fact that there have only been 12 teams since the very beginning of the CDL, and many of these teams have no substitutes. Like their substitute is their coach, or like they're not really they're not spending a lot of money on their teams. Also, the reduction from 5v5 to 4v4, like that cuts out 12 starters and even more players that could have possibly been substitutes. Like, I'm really happy for ProLoot, and I hope that the guys that are on like the Toronto Ultra Academy NA team, like they proved that they were very capable at the Pro-Am Classic and that they probably deserve CDL spots or maybe even just a substitute spot. At least for ProLoot, I wish him the best. I hope, obviously he's already had his first week of matches and the second week is really close to starting, but really happy for him. And I hope that more players can get something like this where they can show at least for a week or two how good they are and how deserving they are to be among the best in the world. Speaking of the Pro-Am Classic, though, let's talk about it. We're not going to spend too much time on it just because, we got to talk about some of the other things, and this event, people were talking about it, like whether this event counts or not. I don't know if you saw that on Twitter, but, whether New York's title actually, whether it counts in the sense of like a championship or whatever, because it had amateur teams or challengers teams, and because there was no like CDL points involved, because all of the other events that we have in the CDL points, which are based off of wins and placings and dictate the seeds for majors and champs at the end of the season, that wasn't a part of this because challengers players obviously they don't get CDL points. I think of it like, I think it counts obviously because all of the teams were there and it was on LAN. There was a relatively sizable prize pool. I don't see why it wouldn't. I just don't think it's like on the same level as a major, because the single elimination factor and the fact that it's kind of like a mid-season break tournament. It's a little bit different, but what do you think about it? Like, does it count, like a regular tournament win would?
Yeah, I feel like you have to count, especially if we're counting like online home series wins from MW. Like this certainly is more qualified to count than those, in my opinion. I would have to look at the exact number, but like, New York played 3 pool play matches, and then they play 3 matches in the bracket. So although it's a single elim bracket, I guess that's an argument against it counting.
Yeah.
But that's 6 matches. So then, what did I would have to look at? I
Well, I
think it
mean,
didn't
if
LAG play 7 in.
losers.
Well, I think they played like one, then 5 in losers, and then grand finals. I'm trying to look it up.
Yeah.
Um,
If you're comparing
Major
that,
2.
like if you compare just like the number of series, then like a lot of the events like in like champs last year, because like you had the buys and stuff, like those teams in the upper bracket, they literally would only have to win like 1 or 2 series to get into grand finals. Like they'd have to win
Yeah.
like I think 2 to get into grand finals, but they're automatically slotted in. Like that's a really big advantage, and I think like people are going to complain no matter what. Like that's just kind of how it is. But I think like the single elimination does factor into it, but not as much as like other factors, I think, for other tournaments.
Yeah, so that's where I was going with it. So like LAG goes on this historic losers bracket run where they lose in the first round of winners bracket,
Mm-hmm.
and then sweep through the lower bracket and win the grand finals, and that's playing 7 matches. So
Yeah.
that's playing one more match than New York had to play to win the Pro-Am Classic. Whereas, you look at a team, I'll just use FaZe for example because I know they've done it before. Well, I guess they haven't done it this year, but same format as far as I can remember. At least, FaZe wins 2 matches in winners bracket, or it would be 3 matches in winners bracket to get the grand finals. So they could, if they win the grand finals, well, regardless if they win, FaZe played 4 matches in
Yeah.
Major 2. So they played 2 less matches than New York, who won the whole thing of the Pro-Am Classic. So I feel like from that perspective, you basically have to count this. I guess, it's tough though. Like,
I
you
think
can't
the
just,
main thing was people are like, do you count this to Crim6's total because he has the
yeah.
most championship wins? Like, so is this like an actual like? Do we put like number 38 or 37 or 38? Do we put that on him?
Yeah, I think you do. Because I mean, my thing was you could like break it down for the COVID era, and you could say like, um, I don't know the exact numbers, but you could say like Krim has 35 championships and then 2 online home series wins or something like that. Um, but that's still like you can't just break it down to say like, I mean you could, but it would be weird if you say like Krim has 30x championships and he has 2 online championships and 1 Pro Am Classic championship and 1 major and yada yada yada. Like
Yeah.
it would just like kind of defeat the purpose at that point in my eyes. So I think, I can't think of a solid argument for why the Pro-Am wouldn't count. Like you said, it's on LAN. Only thing I guess you can say against it is not double elimination, but there was pool play. So like if you're not counting the Pro-Am Classic, does that mean like some of the MLG tournaments that had the same format not count? I don't know. It's a weird argument in my eyes, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm looking on Kai Gamepedia and they have Crim6 listed. So he's number 1 with 36 wins, and then they put in parentheses 3 online. So I don't know if that's like in addition to the 36 or if that's including like included in the 36 wins. But however, the case may be, I think that like obviously those home series wins regardless of whether they would have been online or on LAN, like they weren't inviting all of the teams anyway. Like I think they excluded 4 teams for each home series event. So like I don't know, like does it really matter at the end of the day? Like I think like a win is a win. Like you're not counting like 2Ks and 5Ks from the MLG era, but like the other big events, like if you're getting a trophy or if like it's a really popular event, like you're probably gonna get it counted for you, right? Like frag cups like in the MW3 era, like those count. Because there weren't a lot of lands back then, so like those big online tournaments they count. Um, I think if a lot of pro teams, like I probably would count like UGC Niagara from Black Ops 2, like a lot of pro teams ended up going to that event, even though like it's not a premier event. It's not like a MLG Columbus kind of tournament. But I think if you have a lot of good teams go and there's a significant amount of hype and like a certain amount of money involved, then I think we add another title to Crim6's his overall total, and we just call him the GOAT and go along our way. But yeah, Crim6 and the New York Subliners, they won. They had a pretty surprising run considering this was their first event with their new roster. So Kismet, he came into the lineup this time. So he came in for Neptune, who has been released by the New York Subliners. We'll talk about that, right after we talk about the Subliners, winning the event. But the Subliners, they ended up winning the Pro-Am Classic, and they beat the Los Angeles Thieves in the grand finals. So this was not a best of 9. This was a best of 5. So Subliners, they won 3-1 over the Thieves. The Thieves, that's a really surprising team to be in the grand finals as well because they looked horrible in the Major 2 qualifiers. They made a little bit of a run in Major 2. They role swapped, and they even kind of struggled in group play. They didn't look too hot against the Subliners in that first group play match, but they rebounded. They beat the Royal Ravens in Team War, and they made a run. They beat Boston, Optic, and then they lost to New York in the grand finals. I guess like how surprising is it to you that the Subliners ended up winning this event despite having probably pretty limited practice with Kismet and this being their first time playing like in an official capacity with him.
It certainly was surprising. Like I don't think many people would have expected them going into the tournament to win the whole thing or predicted them necessarily, but just thinking about it, they're especially once you get into this bracket stage here, which I do want to point out, the Toronto NA Academy team, I believe it was, um, they had a good showing, definitely the best showing of any of the amateur teams in the Pro-Am Classic, but they went 2-1 in their group, and they just lost out in the map count tiebreaker to Paris and Boston. So that was a good performance, and obviously eye-opening for potentially some of those players like Scrappy and Mohawk. So yeah, I mean that was cool to see, at least from the amateur side of things. But other than that, this entire bracket is just the uh, 8 CDL teams. So in terms of, as we talked about a while ago with our discussion of the example of could Alabama beat the Browns? Um, Obviously, there are some major differences between the examples and stuff, but at the end of the day, we see once it comes down to the bracket play here that it's just the 8 CDL teams that make it to this point. And sure, there was teams playing with new players like New York, and who is the other one that I can't think of off the
Optic
top?
played with a sub in for most of the tournament.
Yeah, but there's. Oh, I'm dumb because I said 8 teams, but obviously there are 12 CDL teams.
Yeah, but 8
Um,
CDL teams made
yeah,
the
yeah.
bracket.
Um, there's another team playing with a new player,
London.
and I don't know, like London and Minnesota. I was thinking of
Yeah.
Havoc, but I couldn't think for whatever
Yeah.
reason. But there are a lot of teams playing with new players at this event, and then you had situations like you said with Optic and Illy in general, and these were coming in with the role change for Kenny and Draza. So, um, although there's that argument behind will it count and whatnot, this was a tournament where teams were maybe experimenting a little bit. Um, and even if they weren't intentionally experimenting, it was still an opportunity to see how some things might work before the official regular season of the CDL kicked off. So, regardless of all the circumstances, the subliners did end up coming out and then take it. So, congratulations to them. And back to your original point, I was kind of surprised to see them. At the end of the day, I might have to eventually go back and watch some more of these matches. So, I know exactly how they did it, but just looking at their bracket, a first round matchup against Paris kind of feels like that's something that could have benefited them and given them a momentum
Mm-hmm.
boost to try and get through the lower half of the bracket. And it's not like they had to play a phase or an optic, regardless of the early situation there. But they played the team put in front of them, and they walk away with a chip, whether you count it or not.
Yeah. I think the smaller groups for each, so there are 4 groups of 4 teams, instead of what we're used to right now where the league is split into 2 and you have 6 teams in each group and everybody's playing each other, so you have 5 total matches. I think that small, like, 4-team group, I think that helps some of these teams a lot better because they don't have to play optic, they don't have to play phase, like they don't have to do that in group play and fight for there's a possibility that you would have like optic, phase, thieves, and like Toronto in your group in like the 6-team groups. Whereas, like, you're not obviously going to have that at the Pro-Am Classic. You're going to have a Challengers team in there. You probably might have, like, a bottom 4 team in your group. Like, you could have, like, Paris. You could have London, or London's not a bottom 4 team. But just for an example, like, London struggled at this event. Like, you could have them in your group. And then you might have one good team in your group. And personally, I think that benefited some of these teams. Like, I think Paris getting to the bracket was surprising for me, at least, because I thought if there was like, if I thought of the 8 CDL teams that could make it, or however many, like, I didn't think Paris would be one of them. Obviously, I thought that maybe London might not make it just because of the roster change or whatever. Same with Minnesota. And I wasn't really sure about New York. Like I was kind of uncertain about how they would perform, but they exceeded expectations. And I guess Paris did too, even though like I'm disappointed for the Ultra Academy NA guys because like to lose out on a 3-way tiebreaker for first place, like for that spot, that's horrible. Like that's I think that for the CDL, if they do a 2023 Pro-Am Classic, that's something that has to change. Like the tiebreakers, like I would have preferred just like a tiebreaker match, like a best of 3 or something for, between the tied teams just to determine it, or play more group play matches, because I think for those academy guys just to like get bumped out of the bracket and the chance to win a championship because of a 3-way tiebreaker, I think that's not great for them. But yeah, that's how it was. The Pro-Am Classic, I think, is an interesting idea. I'd love to see it come back. I think it's a good mid-season event. It's a lot more interesting to me, at least, than like an all-star event. There's no reason for me to tune into an all-star event personally, but a Pro-Am Classic where I get to see some of the better challengers teams and see how they stack up, and possibly see future CDL players go against teams. I think that's a really cool idea, and I hope that it comes back next year. Let's move on to our next of the matches that that happened this past week. So we had the first week of qualifying matches for the third major of the CDL season. And, if you're just tuning in, you're really not sure how it works. So like I mentioned just a little bit ago, all 12 CDL teams, they are split into 2. So 6 teams are in Group A, 6 teams are in Group B. And, these groups...
No, what are you talking about?
Wait, no, I'm kind of faded right now. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what I was actually thinking, to be honest.
They did groups last year.
Yeah, I think I was reverting back to 2021 brain, but
We're rusty.
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks and we only did one podcast in like a month and a half, so yeah, but my bad. So each team plays five matches over 3 weeks, and the top 8 teams from after those 5 matches are complete, they then move into Major 3. They automatically qualify for the winners bracket. The bottom 4 teams, after those 5 matches, they go into the losers bracket, which is an obvious disadvantage because if they lose, they're out. Whereas any of those 8 winners bracket teams, they can lose at least one match, like the Los Angeles Guerrillas did in Major 2, and they can still progress through their tournament if they continue to win. So we had the first week of qualifying matches this week. On Friday, we had the Los Angeles Thieves versus the London Royal Ravens, Optic Texas versus the Los Angeles Guerrillas, and the New York Subliners versus the Atlanta FaZe. I don't think we really need to go match by match for a lot of these, just because I would like to not labor on any of these points. But I think the most surprising result of this was personally just the fact that Atlanta stomped out New York, because New York was coming off of that Pro-Am Classic win. Atlanta lost in the first round of the winners of the Pro-Am bracket, surprisingly, and then Atlanta comes out and they beat New York. What do you think? Do you think that's I know that we're a very pro Atlanta FaZe podcast, and we believe in them a lot, but did you find that as surprising as I did?
Yeah, I expect Atlanta to beat New York regardless of what happened at the Pro-Am. So I'm not necessarily surprised. Again, like we were talking about earlier in the show, I didn't actually get to watch these matches because I was at a wedding this past weekend, so I don't know much beyond the final score and the final stats and whatnot. But yeah, I would expect Atlanta to beat New York regardless of that Pro-Am championship.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a close match. It's not like it was like a blowout or anything. But I just think the fact that New York, who played so well, like they won all 6 of their matches at the Pro-Am Classic, didn't lose a single match. I was a little concerned, like even though I'm not considering like the Pro-Am Classic like to be the end all be all, like that's like the barometer by which like I'm determining like who is great and who is bad currently. But I thought like, all right, maybe like there is something to it. Maybe New York is a better team than I thought, like quicker than I thought. I thought maybe okay, like they're progressing at a faster rate than I expected them to. But I think this kind of just like tempered my expectations personally of like, oh, okay, like the teams that have been good in the CDL probably just will remain good as long as their roster is like relatively stable, because like we saw it with London, like they kind of struggled because they have this new roster and then they get swept by the Los Angeles Thieves, and the Thieves played really well in the Pro-Am Classic, and London obviously didn't make the bracket. But I think London, they're in that spot where they were like before Gizmo left the first time, they were chugging along. They were very good. And even when Paul X came in and Gizmo came back, like they didn't really seem to miss a beat. But I think permanently going from Gizmo to Harry now, I think that could be an issue for them. Like not like Harry's bad or anything, but that chemistry is not there anymore. And I think a permanent change probably is going to be difficult. What do you think about London in their first match without Harry in an official capacity, or without Gizmo in an official capacity? They get swept by LAT.
Yeah, I mean, I literally haven't seen Harry play at all.
Yeah.
So, I don't know really what to say about it, but I think, with the limited information I do have, it's just, seems like what you said there, that, something could be off with the squad and chemistry could play a part in that. And, London was performing well early in the season, and now they obviously with Gizmo's mental health and personal situation, like um, it's just not something you ideally want to run into as a squad. But it's about how you deal with that adversity and bounce back. So London's definitely got some talent over there, and they could find a way to make it work. It'll just come down to whether they actually end up doing that or not.
In Optic, they won both of their matches this week with Proloot in the roster. So I mean that's a great start for them, at least to the qualifying matches. Proloot, just going through his stats real quick. So he's kind of just like he's gonna have to basically stick this team together, like he has to make sure he doesn't do too poorly where it stands out and he's like holding them back. But in S&D, he actually led the team in kills per round with 1.11. His overall KD in S&D was 2.22, which was obviously the highest of any of them. Hard point, like I think he's not gonna be like when you have Shotzi, like you don't want another Shotzi light, you don't want him to be running around the map. And Scump had an incredible hard point run this week, and he was just kind of killing everything that was moving. So I don't think that it was like necessary for him personally to do a ton, but I think he fit in really well. They won both of their matches 3-0. They beat Florida and they beat LAG. So, I mean, that's an incredible start for Proloot, and a very good start for Optic as well. Let's talk about, I don't really know exactly what we should talk about, because obviously you don't, you haven't watched the matches, so it's kind of hard to get an in-depth, result. But let's talk about LAG just real quick, because I know we talked about the Spart thing, but like them going 0-6 after what was an incredible run at the major. They they win the championship and everything. But to go 0-6, like, what do you think is the cause of that? Because they're okay. Like, I can understand a 3-0 to Optic. Optic is very good, even with a stand-in with ProLoot. But losing 3-0 to Minnesota, who made a roster change during the break. Minnesota also didn't do particularly well at the Pro-Am Classic. Minnesota didn't really look very good, like, in the first half of the season. Like, what do you think changed from, like, internally, I guess, from the second major where they're just killing everything, they're an incredible S&D team, to like going 0-6 in a week and then making this change?
I really don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things you can point to. You can point to the Volk being a factor in Major 2, no longer being a part of the meta due to GA. Obviously don't want to say that's the only reason they won the major or anything like that, because I don't believe that, but it's just something you got to point out. You can also point out that I lost what I was going to say. Damn.
It
There's the
happens to the
Volk.
best of us.
There's the Volk I was going to mention. Obviously, you can talk about like maybe the circumstance of the major, like just because they were on that losers bracket run. They could heat up through the bracket there as opposed to just playing these singular matches. So momentum could be a factor. There also, it could be an attitude thing too, where they really were playing with nothing to lose. They going into that major with low expectations. And now you could maybe say like the pressure is on for them to perform. I don't know. There's a ton of things, and end of the day, we're not gonna know what exactly is going on there. But it's also only not counting the pro-am, and these are just 2 matches. So. Oh, I do remember now. I was gonna say it could also just be Vanguard. Vanguard and Call of Duty in general is very day to day, and that could also play some part in it, where it's just hasn't been their day now, but they had their chance and they had their run major. So not really sure. There's a lot of things you can look at, but doesn't really matter now. It's in the past at this point, and they're going forward with gunless. So gonna have to see how the squad responds to his return.
Let's talk about Paris. This is like a recurring theme on our podcast. We could just make a segment. Paris is winning champs, yes or no? I think we're both on the nose right now. I don't want to speak for you, but I think I'd have to get you drug tested if you said yes at this point. They went 0-2 this week. Kind of a rough start to the season, or just a rough season in general for Paris at this point. When is it time to make another roster change for Paris? Because they brought in Tom Gravity. And he ended up playing that what was it, the first major with Paris. So like they ended up making a roster change where it was just one person for Major 1. So they brought in Gravity for Decimate. And then before the start of the Major 2 qualifiers, they released Fellow and brought in Jimbo. And, they've obviously been bad, like really bad. I'm trying to look up their entire schedule. So not including the Kickoff Classic, they've won 4 matches. Even if you included the Kickoff Classic, they won 4 matches. So they beat the Seattle Surge in the first round of the losers bracket at Major 1, which was a huge win for them. What are you holding up 2 for?
Oh, they're 2-13.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at the Pro-Am Classic. So if you exclude the Pro-Am Classic, yeah, they have won 2. So they won that Seattle Surge match, which was really big for them. And then in week 3 of the Major 2 qualifiers, they beat the Toronto Ultra. Both of those wins were in Game 5. Granted, they have lost quite a few Game 5s. So I look at it like they lost to Atlanta FaZe in the first match of their season in Game 5. They lost to the Minnesota Rocker, London Royal Ravens. I think like it's kind of bad luck at some point. Like maybe some of those things should have gone their way, but to go 2-13 is really bad. And I saw Temp. He kind of seems over it. He's playing really, really well despite their record, which, you know, sucks for him. I mean, his like tweet when they lost to Seattle said, "LOL, GG's, Seattle Surge lost 3-1." And then I saw Tom Gravity's tweet said, "Got to put the plan in action and trust each other. Stupid mistakes shouldn't be holding us back like this. Got to play how we practice and practice how we play. We're right there, I swear to God. Back to the grind." I think that's nice and all, but like at some point, like this team has to probably change, right? Like, or like, what are you like? Are like if they don't make another roster change at this point, like why? Why are you here is basically like what I'm saying. Like you're 2-13. Like you have to at least try to make a run at champs. Like you're not.
Do you?
Well, there's like it's not a draft. You don't get the first overall pick if you end up with the worst record.
No.
But like, I mean, what is the point of not trying to go for it at this point?
It costs money.
I mean, I hate to bring it up, but the guy that bought it, like he paid like reportedly $25 million or whatever. You know, he paid millions of dollars for this spot. You're telling me you can't, you don't have $50,000 anywhere to like go get a good challengers player, like maybe $100,000 somewhere to get two good challengers players. Like at this point, like if you're not willing to spend the money, sell the team. Like that, like what's the point? Like, are you like, does I forget what his name is, like McCourt or something. Like, does he really think he's going to recoup the $25 million that he's spending by fielding the worst and least popular team in the entire league?
No, but it's just, Paris's philosophy, at least like based on paper, what we've seen is just they don't want to spend a lot of money. And at this point, they're in last place in the overall CDL standings with 20 points. New York is in 11th with 50, so they're 30 behind 11th. And then there's a tie for 8, 9, and 10 at 70. So they're 50 points behind the cutoff to make champs at this point. And if they just continue to struggle, the season is essentially chalked. So why would they want to spend more money if there really isn't any chance of, a return or anything like that? And you could sign a player for the rest of this season, and even if they have a really good season, like, I'll just use Scrappy as an example, even though he's officially signed to Toronto. So I guess we'll go with Mohawk. Like if they Paris signed Mohawk for the minimum and he just absolutely pops off these last couple months of Vanguard, like there's not even a chance that he'll be staying around on Paris next year. Another team could potentially offer him more money and then he leaves. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't agree with you that they're like I agree that they potentially should make a move if they're trying to go for it, but everything we've seen from Paris over the past couple of years seems to indicate that they don't exactly like spending money. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is just the roster they use for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you that like on the notion that they don't spend money, because I've been told that by at least one former player that like it's not a good situation. Like, that's like they are penny pinchers, and that is like just the fact of life, I guess, for Paris. And there are sports teams like that they don't spend money. They try to keep it as low budget as possible. But usually when you have those kind of teams, you have like these teams that are like they're going to do whatever they can to spend the least amount of money, right? Like many of those teams are actively trying to win though. they're just like trying to figure out a way to win without spending money. Like, the Cleveland Indians like they didn't have like a huge payroll when they went to the World Series in 2016, but like they did it. Like Moneyball, the Oakland A's thing, like it was about not spending a lot of money but still getting good results. The Paris Legion, like they're not spending money and they're not getting results, and they're like honestly not even trying, at least from the outside looking in. Not the players. The players are trying, obviously. Like, Temp and Gravity and these guys, like I'm sure they're practicing a lot. They're really frustrated by their situation, but like it would be nice to like just see the organization try to put some money into it and like help them out, like whether it's a player, maybe it's support staff, I don't know, like, but at this point it just like it seems like there are only 12 teams in the league, and one of those teams is like essentially tanking or like not caring enough to put the money into it. Like sports costs money. Like owning a sports team, owning an esports team, like they cost money. And like 50 points, even though like that's a lot for Paris because they've only won 2 matches this season, like 50 points isn't really that much because you could, like, you win even one group play match or one like qualifying match and then one losers bracket match, that's 20 points. You're probably only 30-40 points back now. Like, keep pushing. Like, you might eventually catch up to these guys. I just get really frustrated by like the idea that like we have a team in the league, a very exclusive league where we're not getting expansion, and like one of those teams is just like, all right, like it's over, guys. Let's just pack it up.
I will say, like, we can't disregard the fact that they did make 2 changes this year by bringing in Gravity and Jimbo.
Yeah.
Like that, there's a world in the past where Paris doesn't even make those changes, and we still have the squad of Temp, John, Decimate, and Fellow running out there for the Major 3 qualifiers. So as much as we're talking about Paris not wanting to spend money and all that, like they have at least made some moves this year to try and improve. It's just the roster they initially signed and the moves they've made to try and remedy the roster they originally signed struggled. They've made some moves to try to remedy that, and they still are struggling. So it's not for a lack of total effort. They are making some moves to try and fix things. And not even less than a couple of months ago, the narrative around Gravity was that he's a super good main AR player who has never gotten a chance to prove it on the big stage, and Paris is the team that's giving him that opportunity. And I don't think the same narrative is there around Jimbo, but he's still like a talked about submachine gun player in the challengers scene, and Paris is giving him a shot too. So I think it's, as much as we're kind of talking trash about Paris as an organization, like it's definitely worth noting in my eyes, at least, that they are trying in some capacity. It's just how many times do they have, like, if they bring on another player, that's the 3rd roster change they would have made this year. And has any team made 2 roster changes, like permanent changes? I don't know if any other team has actually made. Actually, New York has, but
that
so
be
New York has signed. Technically, they've signed 3 players actually: Royalty, Paul X, and Kismet.
Yeah.
So I guess Paris hasn't signed the most players technically, but still, like, it's certainly worth mentioning in my eyes, at least, that regardless of a lack of results, Paris is trying in some capacity.
And I appreciate that they did put the effort forth to make that roster change and bring in Gravity and Jimbo, but like that's what I expect of these teams, right? Because like if you don't get results in say a month or maybe a month and a half, make a roster change. See if there's something else that you could be doing to get better results. If that roster change doesn't work out, all right, make another one in a month and a half, 2 months. Like, let's see what happens. But we're, whatever, like more than 3 months into the season. They made 2 roster changes. I mean, they've they've overhauled half of their roster, and maybe it is just like they're not going to get these players, but I also think that part of the reason that they don't get these players is because like not a lot of players are going to play for them, like because there is the narrative, and I think it's a truthful one, that they're not going to spend more than they need to, like they're gonna, like, I think that the salary stuff with the CDL is kind of out of control for some of these teams, like reportedly, but I don't think Paris is buying into that, which is fine. But like they also have to keep making these moves just to like keep their challengers players. And I think like honestly, the best way for Paris to come out of like the CDL and make at least a little bit of money, because I don't see how they make money like at all, is like, all right, we're going to put out like this really good roster, or at least one or two good players, and then we're going to sell these players. Like we're going to let these other teams like buy them out. Kind of what Florida did with Neptune last year. Like reportedly like he got bought out for like a pretty good amount, and New York did that. It didn't work out for New York, but Florida got some money, reportedly in that trade. So like I think that that's the way for Paris to go forward, is to just like focus on developing players as best as they can, and then like spinning them off into like New York or to London or whatever. Like I think that's really the best way forward, if they're not like 100% in on like spending to win, maybe spending to develop and then make some money off of like whoever they develop.
Right, you could say like right now, like what their current place in the standings, the best move they could make is to try and trade Temp somewhere.
Yeah.
Then it comes down to the argument of what team would actually be willing to pay for Temp, and what team, like, Temp has history with a lot of players, but I don't know exactly what team he would be able to join right now and make them like a title contender. I'm trying to think of it as like an MLB trade deadline sort of thing in my head. But regardless of that, yeah, that's something, um, certainly that I would do if I was in Paris's situation. But then you also get into the argument of are they actually like looking to make money short term, or is it more of a long term thing? Because I'm sure, um, when some teams first joined, like the MLB, NBA, NFL, all that stuff, we're in year 3 of the CDL right now. I'm sure there were some small market teams in all of those leagues when they first joined. They weren't necessarily looking to immediately make a profit right away. It's something that you try to build over several years, decades, and I don't know obviously what the plan is for Paris necessarily, but that would be my mindset at least. Is that this isn't something where, where regardless of reports where some teams might not have had to pay their uh, whatever it is, their how much they owe to enter the league, their franchise
Mm-hmm.
fee. Um, Regardless of that, like the teams aren't. Esports in general, there aren't that many profitable orgs, let alone just
Yeah.
franchises in one sport. So, this is a topic I could talk about, and we could talk about for hours. But, uh, yeah, I think you look at Paris right now. I guess that would be one option for them, is to Temp is, I feel like, inarguably the best player on their team, and
Yeah.
if they wanted to try to make a quick profit on him, they could look to move him. But end of the day, I also wouldn't be surprised, like I said earlier, if this is the 4-man Paris squad we see for the rest of Vanguard.
Yeah, I think we put a pin in it for now. I think we had a good discussion about it, but like you said, we could literally talk about like the ecosystem of Call of Duty esports and like esports as a whole for hours and hours, and maybe bring on a guest eventually to talk about it as well. Because, like you've been following Call of Duty esports for, I don't know, whatever, like 10 years, definitely more than 10 years. And I've been following esports for, close to 10, I guess. So like, we've seen a lot, especially with COD, like a lot of things have changed since I started watching. Even more things have changed since you started watching. So we could talk about this a lot. But let's try to wrap up the show. So the standings as we see them right now for this set of qualifying matches, there's only 2 matches in. Some of these teams have 4 matches remaining. Some of them have 3 matches remaining. But at the top we have Minnesota and Optic. So Minnesota, they go 2-0 in matches and 6-0 in map count. With this new roster with Havoc in place of Major Maniac. So in the short term, at least, it looks like a very good move for them at the moment. They are tied with the Optic Texas, who also went 6-0 in map count with ProLoot in the starting roster in place of Illy. In a tie for third, we have Atlanta FaZe and the Toronto Ultra, who both only played 1 match. Atlanta won 3-1, Toronto won 3-2. So, I mean, Toronto, maybe they're coming back, maybe. Seattle Surge, New York Subliners, Los Angeles Thieves, and London Royal Ravens are all tied for 5th at 1-1. I mean, that's a pretty good middle of the road, I think, to see Seattle back in, they're currently 5th. Like, that's pretty good for them. I was worried about them for a little bit. I'm not as worried anymore. I think maybe they could get through the entire season without making a roster change. Speaking of, if we're going to talk about teams that are developing young guys, like Seattle looks pretty dedicated to doing that at the moment. And then the winless teams so far, the bottom 4, Boston Breach, Florida Mutineers, Paris Legion, and Los Angeles Guerrillas. We talked about the Guerrillas. They're 0-6 so far. Paris are 3-6, map count 0-2 in matches. And Boston and Florida are both tied for 9th right now at 0-1. So Florida, they got swept, and the Boston Breach are 1-3. And that is your standings for the qualifying matches. And then you go ahead.
I just want to rapid fire through the results because we kind of didn't actually give all the results from this past week. We touched on LA Thieves beating London 3-0, Optic beating LAG 3-0, and then Atlanta beating New York 3-1. Those were the Friday matches this past week. We had London 3-2ing Paris on Saturday, Toronto 3-2'd Seattle, Optic won 3-0 over Florida, and then Minnesota won 3-0 over LAG. Then on Sunday, we had Seattle 3-1 Paris, which is why I was shaking my head when you were going through the Seattle stuff, like you saying, like Seattle might be back or whatever. Like, we got to hold the break on that, in my opinion, just because, they won 1 match and it's against Paris. So Seattle won that 3-1. Minnesota goes 3-0 over LA Thieves. So not only is Minnesota 2-0 and 6-0 map count, but those 2 wins in the 6-0 map count is also against both Los Angeles teams. Just a fun factoid there. And then New York beats Boston 3-1 in the heated sports rivalry that isn't necessarily a rivalry yet in the CDL.
Yeah. The Cdl Point Standings as we have them right now. So this is for the entire season. We talked about what I was talking about was just like these set of qualifying matches, which just have to deal with Major 3 and how teams will be seeded. In the overall season standings, Atlanta FaZe, they are narrowly ahead of Optic right now for first. Atlanta has 190 CDL points. Optic is in second place with 185. Both teams have won 16 matches, but Optic has played one less match. So, take that as you will. Third place, London with 140. Boston in 4th, 120. Guerrillas are shortly behind. They have 115. The Los Angeles Thieves and Seattle Surge are tied for 6th place right now with 80 points. Minnesota and Florida and Toronto, like you said earlier in the show, are in a 3-way tie for 8th with 70 points right now. But Minnesota, they played 1 less match. Same with Seattle with the tie against with LAT. They've played 17 matches. LAT played 18 so far. And then 11th place, New York, despite however well they did at the Pro-Am Classic, it doesn't really count. So it doesn't count toward, the actual points. So they're still in 11th, and it's going to be, it's not the hardest thing because they're only 20 points out of 8th right now, but I mean, it would have been nice for them if the Pro-Am Classic counted toward the CDL point standings. And in 12th place, the aforementioned Paris Legion, 20 points, 2-13 on the season, 21-43 in map count so far. Obviously, the worst of any team in the CDL. But that is your CDL point standings. We have a pretty good schedule left for this week. We have 10 matches. We're just going to kind of rapid fire through, give our predictions and stuff. So Friday, we have Boston versus London, Minnesota versus Toronto, and Florida versus LAG. Let's go Boston versus London. Who you got there?
Boston.
I'm going to go with Boston as well. I'm not really believing in London right now. Minnesota versus Toronto. Who do you have?
I got to go with Minnesota just because, obviously last week went well for them. They haven't dropped a map yet. So without having actually seen Toronto play recently, I don't know exactly what their situation is with hardpoint still, if that's still a struggle or not. And I mean, Minnesota's also had their struggles in hardpoint. So this could be a close series, but I'll go with Minnesota just based off of recent results.
I'm also going to go with Minnesota. I'm just not like totally believing in Toronto. So, although I believe that Toronto, they won both of their hard points against, never mind. I was going to say they won both against StrikeX. They won both against Seattle, in last week. So maybe they're back. Yeah, but I'm still going to go with Minnesota. LAG versus Florida. I'm going with Florida. I'm not like LAG were kind of a middle of the road team when they had Gunless, even though they seem to be trending upward. But like he's back in the roster. I'm going to go with Florida on this one.
Yep, I think Florida probably takes this one. I'm going to pick LAG just for the sake of the Big P buff.
Yeah. Saturday, May 21st, we have 4 matches. The first of which, Paris versus New York. Not surprising. I'm going with New York.
Yep, New York next.
LAT versus Seattle. Who do you have?
I'm going to go with Seattle. But again, I really don't know enough about how LAT has been performing with, despite their results at the Pro-Am Classic, they had kind of a back and I don't want to say back and forth, but they had the 3-0 win over London in the most recent qualifier, and then they lose 3-0 to Minnesota. So that kind of seems like shows a little bit of inconsistency. So I think this is an opportunity for Seattle to get a win. But I do remember when Seattle was going on their losing streak in, I think, like this major 2 qualifiers, maybe. I said something similar where I was hoping that Seattle could turn things around against LA Thieves when they were struggling, and then LA Thieves got a win, but it must not have been in the qualifiers because LA Thieves went 0-5. So I don't know what I'm thinking of, but regardless, I think this is another matchup where previously I predicted Seattle to beat LA Thieves, and that didn't happen. So I will repeat history and probably be wrong, but I'll go with Seattle.
I'm going to go with LAT. I'm on the fence about it, but I don't think either of them are particularly strong, but, got to go with someone. Minnesota versus Florida. I'm going to go with Florida. I'm back all on the Mutineers train despite the 3-0 this week, so I'm going with Florida for this one.
I got Minnesota.
Last match of Saturday, Boston versus Atlanta. Definitely just going to Atlanta.
Yes, sir.
Sunday, May 22nd, we have 3 matches. Paris versus LAG. I'm not going to pick the upset, LAG.
Yep.
Optic versus Atlanta. We have the biggest match that possibly could happen. I'm going to go with Atlanta. Optic, they have a sub right now. It's kind of hard to pick against Atlanta in that case.
I'm going with Atlanta too, but it's certainly worth mentioning. We did just see at the Pro-Am Classic, Optic beat the FaZe with General in the lineup, and obviously we saw in the first major, Optic beat Atlanta with their regular roster with Ellie. So if Optic wins this match, this would be the 3rd different roster that Optic has beat Atlanta with this year, which would be kind of a cool fact. But I will go with Atlanta.
And the final match of the week is the New York Subliners versus the Toronto Ultra. I'm going to go with Toronto in this. I think I'm not like completely sold on New York just being like one of the top teams right now, like despite their Pro Am Classic stuff. Like I think that Toronto as a team probably is just gonna gel a little bit better. So I'm gonna go with the Ultra.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with New York.
And that does it for our predictions for this week. We didn't do predictions for Pro Am or Week 1, so the prediction scores stay the same. You are at 54 and 42. I'm at 53 43. And that about does it for the show. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure to subscribe or like or do whatever on those feeds. We're on Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever. 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Ego Chall Podcast. He's at JBink with 2Ks. I'm at Pres Byers. The next show likely will be May 24th, maybe May 25th. We'll see. It depends on how many dingers Bink hits at softball and how quickly they can mercy rule this next team. But that does it for me. And take it away, Bink.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. I know this was a little bit of a different show, just due to circumstances with me in particular not being able to watch the most recent set of matches and that stuff. So sorry for a lack of like any quote unquote in-depth analysis or anything like that. But hopefully, after this weekend and the following show after that, we'll have some more insightful insight for you guys. But yeah, thank you as always for tuning in. Kind of like Preston said, my softball season just started, and I don't know the full schedule because the website that used to have our softball schedule got deleted. So I'm kind of going off on like a week by week text thing with our coach, and I don't know the exact schedule for next week yet. So best way to know when our next show will be is to follow us or the podcast Twitter, and we will keep you updated, and hopefully we'll have a good show for you next time you tune in. So yeah, as always, remember to send the chow.